So we're going to go over what a slave narrative entails. It's a special form of captivity. We've already talked about captivity narratives as far as white European women goes. But now we're going to look at the slave narrative, which is a different type of narrative of captivity. The purpose of a slave narrative is to arouse the sympathy of readers in order to promote humanitarianism. So to make people feel sympathetic toward the cause, whether that cause be abolition of slavery at the time or later even looking just back at rights, civil rights. Okay, so it's supposed to make people feel like, wow, this is wrong. I should be a good person. It's also going to emphasize traditional Christian religious ideas, which is going to help some people who feel like at the time African Americans were just different culturally, and if they have that same Christian religious value system that the white people have, there can be a little bit more sympathy there as well because they can relate to one another. It's going to show the acceptance of the ideals of the dominant white society. It's not going to have all these radical ideas that go against white society. It's going to show the acceptance of those, so people don't read that and think there's a danger. And it's also going to emphasize the cruelty of the individual slave owner. So each slave owner was very different how they acted, but if they had a cruel slave owner, you're going to see that, and it's going to be portrayed in great detail, sensory detail, and all of that. So that is the purpose of a slave narrative. And it was popular because lurid scenes of horror and violence served as acceptable gratification of the popular appetite for sensationalism. We talked about this with the captivity narratives. There's lots of things that we watch that you're like, why are you watching that? And it's just because you can't really look away. And that was their version of that type of literature. It's going to have a religious influence, something called didactic content. It's going to be didactic, meaning its point is to teach a lesson. There should be a sense of, at the end, the moral of the story is. So there's a reason for the story. It's got that lesson to be taught. It's also going to include interesting descriptions of life in the South, which for a lot of people, they didn't really know what was happening in the South. If you weren't there, you didn't know how different it was, so people like to read about places that they're not. And later, they'll become propaganda weapons during abolition and the Civil War. So they were popular when they first came out, and then they became popular later for these, political uses. The narrator is generally abruptly brought from the state of protected innocence to confrontation with the evil of slavery and captivity. So often you'll have your narrator just playing out front, enjoying life, being a normal kid in Africa, and then suddenly, bam, he's captured and he's being sold into slavery. They're going to be forced to suffer this existence in an alien society that they're not used to. So language will be different, people will be different, sites will be different. Just like we saw with the captivity narratives with the white European women, there's going to be a cultural shift for them that they have to suffer through and try to adjust to. They are not going to be able to resist. There is no resistance when you are being taken for slavery. It's just not an option. It's going to balance the yearning for freedom against the perils of escape. So to say, I really want to be free, but I'm on a boat and I can't swim. Do I jump? Do I jump and hope that I can float and get safely to shore? Or do I risk my life and say, okay, I'm going to try to live, and if I don't, then I die. It's better than being held captive and being a slave. It's going to each narrator generally sees their condition as a symbol of the suffering condition of all the lowly and oppressed. So they kind of represent a group of people. So it's not just about their story, it's everyone who's experiencing their story and maybe can't tell it. And it will grow in moral and spiritual strength as a result of suffering and torment. So basically the worse it is, the more they grow to understand morally that this is wrong, and they grow spiritually because just like with captivity narratives, there is value in faith during times of adversity. Some common themes you're going to see. It's going to expose the physical and emotional abuses of slavery. There'll be scenes of whipping, sexual abuse, starvation, particularly with the women and the children. They were very, very easy targets, and there was no sense of chivalry when it came to them. It will expose, sometimes satirically, the white owner's hypocrisy and inconstancy. So it may make fun of the owners and how they are kind of wishy-washy about what their expectations are. To have expectations go back and forth, that would make it very difficult to know what's the correct thing to do. And so sometimes they would kind of be mocked for that. It's going to describe a quest for freedom, okay, whether it's actually talking about escaping and seeking freedom or just waiting and biding your time until freedom can come. It will include vignettes of other character types and the experience of slavery, those who succeed and those who fail. It's going to make overt appeals to an imagined audience. It's going to reach out to you and say, help me, please, and you will not be able to help. And it does detail the loss of significant family members and the destruction of family ties. Most times when slaves were sold off into slavery, there was no sense of, let's try to keep a family together. It was broken off however it needed to be broken off, and there was no fear or concern about taking a baby out of a mother's arms. That just wasn't a thing. So it was more about business and really just about trading people like they were livestock or cattle. So it's going to have a lot of sensory detail, and that's what we'll be talking about in class when we go to read our story, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano. Thanks.